Good day. Thank you for joining us for another edition of In Conversation with AARP in the Virgin Islands. I'm Troy Deshabir Schuster, State Director for AARP in this territory. We're here today to honor and celebrate the over 50 million people in our country who are family caregivers that make it possible for their parents, spouses, and other loved ones to live at home. They play a critical role in helping with medications and medical care, chores, meals, and much more. And many do it all while also working full or part time. November is National Family Caregivers Month. This November and every month, AARP is fighting for family caregivers, for more support, help at home, workplace flexibility, and financial solutions. Just saying thank you isn't enough. Family and friends comprise the most basic unit of any society. For individuals who take on the responsibility of caring for another person through sickness or disability, it can often be challenging to see beyond the individual experience. Yet, in the aggregate, family caregivers, whether they be families of kin or families of choice, are woven into the fabric of America's health, social, economic, and long-term services systems. As the nation continues to age, the need to support caregivers as the cornerstone of society will only become more and more important. Today, we have invited an expert on caregiving or on caring for the caregivers, Dr. Migdalia Brathwaite. She's a clinical psychologist by training and serves as a facilitator of AARP VI's Caregiver Workshop Series. Dr. Brathwaite, welcome to the show.
Hi, Troy. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to work with you and always a pleasure to have you on the show to share so much information and helpful tips for family caregivers. And so we have a lot to discuss today. And so it is estimated that more than 1 in 5 Americans, that is 21.3% of the population, are caregivers, having
Mhm.
provided care to an adult or child with special needs at some time in the past 12 months. This totals an estimated 53 million adults in the United States, up from the estimated 43.5 million caregivers in 2015. When looking at caregivers, the prevalence of caregiving has risen significantly. And so, Dr. Brathwaite, why is caregiving such a central part of our lives?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, um, Caregiving, everything starts with caregiving, and when we're born, our parents train us to they care for us, and then they move us into a place where they're training us on how to care for ourselves. And there's a cycle, because then we move into wanting to care for other things, and then we move into caring for other people. Caregiving is at the core of everything that makes us human. And so it is a central part of the standard for our living, because everything that we do is about learning how to care for ourselves and others at the same time. And so when we move into being able to care for those that are unable to care for themselves, it really allows us to connect with a bigger part of who we are, a more altruistic version of ourselves. It helps us to recognize that we really all need each other. And so caregiving is at the hub of just life, humanity in general.
It truly is, as you mentioned, from even from the moment of conception, all the
Yes.
way through birth, all the way through death. We're either giving care or receiving care,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and
Absolutely.
yeah, and but it's interesting and paradoxical that even while we are all either receiving or giving care, it seems like more and more there is a crisis of
Mhm.
caregiving. And this is
Yes.
twofold. Number one, either we can't find caregivers
Mhm.
for people who are in need of care, or the caregivers that we do find are getting burnt out. So, talk to us about both sides of that coin.
Yeah, so so the one part about needing care, it springs a lot of fear. It generates a lot of fear in ourselves and others because we don't want to get to a position in our lives where we lose our ability to be able to care for ourselves. It has a lot to do with trust and security and safety. And so those that need care often don't request it or try not to even have people recognize that they need it because people are really afraid that they're not going to be able to get the care that they need or that they'll be looked at as being not sufficient enough in their quality of living. And then, of course, on the flip side, where we have those that provide caregiving, the ones that you're saying get burned out, those people sometimes really there's a delicate balance in being able to provide care for someone else to be aware and sensitive to those needs that people have while at the same time recognizing that you are the central feature in being able to provide the care that people need. So caring for yourself is an important portion of that, but sometimes caregivers are so um they're so selfless. There's this superhero quality sometimes in caring for another person that sometimes people forget to care for themselves. And it's not uncommon that sometimes those that are providing the care meet their demise prior to the people that they're providing care for.
Mm. Yes, yeah. Most of the time, people do not care for themselves. I myself am a caregiver. I
Hmm.
provide care to my mother, and I know that sometimes I forget to eat a meal.
Yes.
I'm worried about making sure that she has eaten.
Right.
And then by the time she's finished eating, then I move on to something else I need to do for her or for my job. And all of a sudden, it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't eaten anything yet for the day.
Right.
Sometimes it's early evening and I'm feeling a bit lightheaded and I'm wondering why am I feeling this way and feeling weak and I haven't eaten yet. But yet
Yeah.
she has had all of her meals and I haven't eaten anything yet,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's so easy to forget about oneself when you truly love the person you're caring for and
Yes.
doing everything in your power to care for that person, to forget oneself.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the piece. It's a delicate balance. Sometimes I think caregivers suffer with feeling like they're wanting the person that they're caring for to recognize their worth and their value, and that the quality of their lives are being so esteemed that again people will not care for themselves. And so that's why programming to remind caregivers that they should care for themselves is so essential. It's not a selfish thing, it's self full, right? You need to
Mhm.
be full of the awareness of the fact that you are the key ingredient in the way that people are being cared for. And so there's always that piece where you have to remember yourself. But I think that sometimes people feel like it's selfish to say no to things sometimes and to ask others to maybe help provide some support with caregiving for their loved one or friend.
Yes, and we're going to come back to that about the support that caregivers need. We're going to talk more about that. But how does caregiving impact society today? What are you
Yeah.
seeing from a psychologist's point of view?
So I think that what we're seeing is that, especially post, well, if we can say post coronavirus, definitely we're still in the pandemic in certain ways, but I think that when we're in a situation where we need so much care and there's so much uncertainty, we have a society that is so in need to feel a sense of being cared for that sometimes uh, when people don't feel that sense of urgency to be cared for, when it's not being met, we find that there's a lot of anger, a lot of edginess, a lot of discomfort that comes from not feeling like you're appropriately cared for. You know, during the pandemic, there was so much information circling that people often felt like they didn't know what to focus on. What could they anchor themselves in to feel that they're cared for? And that's what happens um, when society doesn't focus enough on caregiving. There is this sense of uncertainty. Am I going to be guaranteed that I'm going to have services available to me, or family available to me, or if someone provides care for me, is there going to be any kind of abuse or neglect involved in that? So there's a ribbon of uncertainty that can go through a society that doesn't feel like caregiving is properly attended to, and which definitely leads to talking more about the importance of caring, not only from a caregiver, but starting with learning and making caring for the self a priority. Because oftentimes the way that we care for ourselves or we don't care for ourselves can be echoed in the kind of caregiving that we provide for others.
And so, how can we have or facilitate a more expansive conversation about caregiving's impact in our communities and bring it to a greater awareness, bring the people to a greater awareness?
That's a great question. I think we need to talk about it more. We need to really understand why we aren't talking about caregiving as much. Like you said in the beginning, there are over 40 million people that are providing caregiving, yet we don't hear enough about it. And so I think that that conversation needs to be expanded. I think fear needs to be addressed in those that are being cared for and those that are going to provide caregiving. I think that people need to understand what a large portion of just being human and being valued in society is involved with having caregiving at its core. You know, I think that you and I had a discussion some time back where we were even talking about the violence that we see in communities having a tentacle in the fact that people are not feeling cared for. So they're connecting with something that may make them feel cared for, which is joining maybe a community of people or a group that will provide that caregiving. And it looks like violence, but there's a caring component in there, even though it may be eclipsed by the violence. People are looking for different ways to feel that they belong, and that they in that belonging that they feel a sense of being cared for. And so the conversation needs to be larger. We need to have a bigger voice about caring and what people think caring is, because there's so much more to being cared for and what we think caring is than what we're seeing being presented in social media and just in our communities and society at large.
And in a recent conversation that you and I had,
Mhm.
you also brought up the point that everybody is a caregiver and
Absolutely.
everybody is a care recipient. So, talk to us about that from
Mhm.
earliest childhood all the way through, about being a caregiver and a care recipient.
Yeah, yeah. So that is true. So if we take it back down to its smallest component, as I had shared earlier, um, we are all looking for ways to be seen, ways to be valued, ways to be encouraged in our standard of living. And so caregiving is at the core of that. As I said before, when you're born, your parents care for you, but they teach you how to care for yourself. And then you move towards wanting to care for a pet, and then you move from that to want to care for um, another person. So you develop friendships, and you hope that those friendships will provide that caring component for you. Because at the core of caring is also belonging. I belong, even if it's with a caregiver that's receiving compensation for caring for you. there's a sense that in those moments that they spend with you, that 8 hours, that there's a belonging relationship that's happening, right? And in that belonging relationship, you're wanting to feel that your care is central, it's quality, that you're valued, that the quality of support that you're getting will affirm your humanity, your personhood. And I think that what's really important is that we recognize that we are providing care all of the time to those around us in our jobs. We also spoke about the fact that uh, in hospitals, people go there to be cared for, but nobody really thinks about providing care for the person that's giving you care, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is why we have things like compassion fatigue and so on. But it's really important for us to connect with the fact that we need to recognize that, one of our highest values to feel is to feel that we belong, and in that belonging to feel that we're cared for. And so we move from having friends that we hope will care for us to moving to having a significant other that will be reciprocal and caring for us, to having children that we hope will care for us. And then the cycle begins again. So it is this cycle of caring that is all around us, even in the community, even the way that we receive care when people are providing a service for us in business establishments, right? Care is at the core. And I think when we recognize that, then you also have a duty when you're receiving a service from someone in the community to provide them with care as well. If we recognize that caregiving was not just, it's great that we have this month of caregiving, but if we recognize that caregiving is every moment of our living, can you imagine the quality of life that we would have if we
Exactly.
all allowed caregiving to be at the core?
Exactly. And it really hurts so deeply when we see in the news all of these reports of violence in schools. Even right here in the Virgin Islands, every once in a
Mhm.
while on Facebook, you see children getting into a big brawl on in the playground or in between the classrooms in the schools here and fighting each other and kicking each other up. And we hear of gun violence in schools. So from an early age, it's like somehow they have lost that experience or that knowledge of caregiving.
Exactly.
Children when they help each other in school, or if one child trips and falls and another child helps them up, that is caregiving.
That is
Being a
caregiving.
caregiver and receiving care, right? Um, Helping each other with your homework or with your studies or to understand something, that's caregiving.
That's caregiving.
and and children need to learn that from an early age and carry that all the way through. but
Yes.
but jumping back again to caring for caregivers,
Mm.
caregivers are usually people who are just giving and giving
Yes.
and giving of their self. But
Mhm.
then who takes care of the caregiver? Does the
Yes.
caregiver have all the support they need? you
So,
know
so that's an interesting topic because it really depends on what the story is, what the narrative is around that person's caregiving journey, right?
Mhm.
And let's just say between a parent and a child, if you have a home where there are other siblings and one sibling tends to carry the heavier burden of caregiving, there's a story supporting that. And what does that story really say about the needs of the parent, the needs of the relationship of the siblings? That is not uncommon for siblings to have one that sort of bears the heavier burden of it. But what's really important is to recognize that in that story, whatever that narrative is that's playing in the background of your life, it's important to have some anchors built in,
Mhm.
right? And one of those anchors is to recognize that you need to have a group, a team, some other support that is identified while you're moving into this caregiving journey. You may not use them all of the time, but just to have the support that's there, because we all need that support as well. And just taking a moment to say that that is a necessity, it brings the person that's providing the care front and center. I'm not superhuman. And it's not the people that are giving you all of the rules, because there's so many rules around caregiving. Give the medication at this time, turn the person this way, make sure they get to their doctor's appointments. There's so many rules that keeping up with all those balls that are in the air can very often move you from being anchored in your own needs. And so it's really important to recognize what kinds of services can be there to give you respite, even if that's for 1 hour a week, even if it's for 30 minutes. Something needs to be in place where people can replenish themselves and have that space of time that is just for them. When we're doing our caregiving workshops, we talk a lot about carving out time for yourself. We talk about creating green space and other kinds of things that will help you to place yourself as a priority in the caregiving responsibilities that you have.
And it's so important for caregivers to recognize that not only do they need physical support and respite, et cetera,
Yeah.
dealing with the physical strains of being a caregiver, but the emotional, right? The emotional strains, which are even
Absolutely.
much more difficult,
Yes.
especially when you're tuned into your loved one, when you're really caring for your loved one, when you really love your loved one, and you're seeing them languish, you're seeing them decline, you're seeing their energy levels fall, you're seeing them becoming more and more ill. It can sometimes it can feel almost like you're dying with that person,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
Emotionally. And that emotion even turns into a physical, where it feels almost like you're actually physically dying with that person
Yeah.
because of being tuned in. And so we all need to be able to find that emotional and psychological support, right, to deal
Right.
with those rigors.
Right. And so that's one of the anchors. So if you can have a therapist, or if you can have a friend that you check in with all of the time to, just remind you that you're in this too, that you're not alone. And absolutely, the emotional uh, pain is there because, as you said, sometimes it feels like you're dying right along with that person, but in a sense, there is a part of you that's transitioning from the relationship that you had before with that person. Um, when we do our caring for the caregiver workshops, one of the things that we explore as a group is um, how that relationship is transitioning. My blank is becoming a blank to me, right? And my mother, I can remember that one person said, my mother is becoming my daughter.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
That's a very important contemplation, because then what that says is that the role that you had has now transitioned. There's a loss, there's a grief associated with that old role. And that's why it's important, if people are able, to have an emotional other there for them to help them negotiate the pain that's associated with all of these emotional transitions, these shifts in the way that you organize your day and the narratives that you have for who you are.
Time is running quickly. We have just like 3 more minutes, but a question from our audience, if you can answer it just very briefly: is it selfish to sometimes think it's just too much for me to handle? Like, why
Yeah.
me?
So we do talk about that in our first workshop called "Who's Driving the Bus?" The narratives that we tell people, and then the things that we don't tell people about how we feel about it. And so, absolutely not. I think that if someone were not feeling the pain of the loss of what their life was before they started their caregiving journey, that would be a very interesting perspective for them to hold on to. So, absolutely not. And I think it's important to have a trusted other, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a friend, whether it's a spiritual leader, to help you explore that why me, right? Because why me is really saying, why did I lose the me that I was before? And how can I become acquainted with this new me? And how do I feel comfortable or safe in this new role? That's why I said it's important for us not to think about these moments where we're asking questions like, why me, to be selfish. Instead, we need to think of it as being self-full, because you're looking at yourself in a fuller sense of what you need in comparison to the work that you do. Again, if I can just talk on the caring for the caregivers workshops that we
Yes.
do, we have a whole section that we call the caregiving selfies. And we talk all about what it means to have a self in the process of caregiving.
Yeah, and these workshops are so wonderful. They're coming up again next year. Caring for the Caregiver workshops led by you, Dr. Migdalia Brathwaite, clinical psychologist, and we hope that more and more people will take advantage of it and get together with their peers, get together with you in these workshops to learn more about how to care for their self as a caregiver. Um, these workshops are free of charge to the community. There's absolutely no charge, and we will always be promoting these workshops on our Facebook page, AARP Virgin Islands Facebook page. We advertise it in the daily news, a VI Consortium, etc. So we're hoping that everybody who's listening, who's a caregiver, whether you're a new caregiver or a more seasoned caregiver, or um, find yourself approaching the point where you become a caregiver, um, or even if you're a care recipient, maybe to participate in these workshops and learn a little bit about what your caregiver may be experiencing, and learn how to support your caregiver as they support you. So, wonderful workshops, again, free of charge to the community, led by Dr. Migdalia Brathwaite, who's our guest today. And we hope that everybody, St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. John, who's a caregiver or even a care recipient, will participate in these workshops. And stay tuned. You'll be hearing much more about them coming up next year. And Dr. Brathwaite has some innovative ways to approach. So even if you've come to our workshops in the past, please come again, because it'll be a little different twist, a little different spin on it. And there's so much to learn about being a family caregiver. So, Dr. Brathwaite, thanks so much for being on our show. Thanks so much for partnering with AARP in the Virgin Islands and bringing your expertise to the table. And I always say that every time I speak with you, it's like you're a balm to the soul. You have such a soothing, refreshing way. So again, we hope that more and more people will come out to experience your wisdom and your wonderful care for all of us. Any
Thank you,
final
Troy.
word? Our last 30 seconds?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Caregiving is not an identity. It is something that we offer ourselves as well as we offer to the person that we're caring for. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you for being on our show, and we'll look forward to a future conversation with you. Have a great day.